They fired her in front of the entire staff, a nurse with blood still drying on her sleeves after saving 3 critical patients. Whispers followed her down the hallway. Serves her right? She thinks she's a hero? So Elena Ward stepped into the rain, clutching her satchel, humiliated and alone. 30 seconds later, everything changed. The ground trembled. A Black Hawk helicopter tore through the storm and dropped straight into the hospital parking lot, blasting debris in every direction. A U.S. Army major jumped out, shouting over the rotor wash, "Find Corporal Elena Ward, Priority 1 extraction." Doctors froze, nurses stared, and the same chief who fired her turned pale. Because they hadn't fired a nurse, they fired a special operations combat medic, the only person a dying sergeant major trusted with his life. Before we begin, if stories of quiet courage and real-life heroes mean something to you, take 1 second to hit subscribe. It helps these untold stories reach the people who need to hear them, and it tells us you're part of a community that still believes in honor, sacrifice, and doing the right thing when no one is watching. The cold fluorescent lights of St. Maryland Hospital reflected off polished floors as the chief physician slammed a stack of papers onto the desk. "You had no right to bypass procedure," he snapped, his voice sharp enough to cut through the heavy air. Elena Ward, 27, still wearing scrubs stained with soot and blood from the morning's industrial fire, stood silently. She had saved 3 critical patients using decisive, life-saving interventions. Yet here she was, being reprimanded for moving too fast, for acting without permission, for choosing a patient's life over a bureaucratic chain of command. She tried to explain. The airway was collapsing. He would have died. But Dr. Hayes cut her off with a dismissive wave. "You are not a doctor. You acted without authorization. You risked liability for this institution." The director stepped forward, face cold and calculated. "Elena Ward, your employment is terminated effective immediately." Behind her, staff whispered, "Serves her right. She thinks she's some kind of hero." She didn't argue. She didn't cry. She simply picked up her worn canvas satchel, turned her back on the place she had given everything to, and walked out into the rain, alone, humiliated, and discarded. The storm hit her immediately, cold drops mixing with the exhaustion on her skin. The parking lot was nearly empty, lit by the flickering glow of a street lamp. She took a slow breath, steadying herself, and stepped forward. The ground trembled. At first, it felt like distant thunder, subtle, almost imagined. Then the vibration deepened, stronger, spreading through puddles that rippled outward in widening circles. Elena turned sharply as the sky erupted. A roaring slice of metal tore through the clouds, an unauthorized Black Hawk helicopter barreling down toward the hospital parking lot. Patients screamed from the lobby windows. Nurses stumbled back in shock. Car alarms blared. Rain exploded upward in violent sprays as the helicopter descended aggressively, ignoring every city regulation. The moment the landing skids hit the asphalt, the side door flew open. A U.S. Army major jumped out, wind and rain hammering against him as he shouted over the hurricane of rotor blades. "Find Corporal Elena Ward. This is a Priority 1 military extraction." Doctors froze mid-step. Nurses pressed to the glass. Dr. Hayes, the same man who had fired her minutes earlier, felt the color drain from his face. Elena stood frozen under the bus shelter, her heart slamming against her ribs as the major's eyes found her. He sprinted through the storm, boots churning through water. He stopped inches from her, breath ragged, urgency radiating from every movement. "Corporal Ward, Sabre 2 has been ambushed. 4 critical casualties. One of them is Sergeant Major Mason Hale. He refuses any medic except you. We need you now." Everything inside her collapsed at once. Her breath, her thoughts, her attempt to outrun the past. Mason, the soldier she had saved in Afghanistan, the man who promised he'd call on her someday if he ever stood up his own team. He was dying, and he wanted her. Not a surgeon, not a military doctor. Her. Without another thought, she dropped her satchel and ran toward the waiting Black Hawk. The moment she clipped her harness, the helicopter shot upward, tearing away from the city. Inside the cabin, her hands transformed, no longer trembling, no longer the hands of a humiliated nurse, but those of a trained combat medic. She tore open the emergency kit with surgical precision, assembling IV lines, pressure systems, airway tools, her voice steady as she commanded, "Patch me into their forward medic and tell Mason, I'm incoming." The helicopter slammed into a dusty, chaotic forward staging area minutes later. Soldiers surrounded them, shouting for help. Elena bolted toward the center of the chaos where Mason Hale lay on a stretcher. His armor was soaked in blood, a tourniquet barely keeping him alive. His eyelids fluttered open. A faint smile formed. "Told them you'd come," he whispered. Elena knelt, already working. "I'm here. Hold on." Her hands moved like lightning, stopping the arterial bleed, stabilizing his airway, directing medics with crisp commands they obeyed instantly. A young medic watched her, awe in his voice. "She's faster than our surgeons." But the moment her confidence threatened the chain of command, a lieutenant colonel stormed forward. "Step aside, nurse. You lack clearance. I'm taking over." Elena didn't even look up. "If you touch him, you'll kill him. His mediastinum is shifting." Gasps erupted. Mason, struggling, whispered, "Do what she says. She's the only reason I'm alive." Elena performed a perfect emergency decompression. 9 seconds, 1 needle, 1 hiss of trapped air, and Mason's vitals stabilized instantly. And then the entire base froze as another helicopter descended. A 3-star general stepped out, surveyed the scene, locked eyes with Elena, and snapped into a full salute. "Corporal Ward, you're still fighting. Thank you for answering the call." The base fell silent. They hadn't just extracted a nurse. They had retrieved a ghost, an elite medic they never should have lost. By the time Elena returned to the city 2 days later, the story had already spread everywhere. Headlines exploded across local news. Nurse fired, then airlifted by military minutes later. Hospital terminates combat medic trusted by special forces. The hospital phones rang nonstop. Administrators panicked. Dr. Hayes hid behind closed doors. But one woman refused to stay silent. The mother of the little boy Elena had saved weeks earlier. She marched straight into the director's office, tears streaking down her face. "You fired the woman who gave me my son back," she said, voice shaking with fury. "Shame on you." Nearby staff, once quick to judge, now lowered their eyes in guilt as they realized how wrong they had been. When Elena stepped out of a discreet military sedan behind the hospital, several junior staff members were waiting near the back gate. Not because they deserved forgiveness, but because they needed to see her, needed to confront their own shame. None of them approached her. They didn't have the right, but suddenly a small voice cut through the tension. The little boy she'd saved ran full speed toward her, throwing his arms around her waist. "You're the best nurse in the world," he shouted. Elena knelt, her smile soft and sad. She didn't need apologies. She didn't need vindication. Saving lives had never been about recognition. Days later, a secure package arrived at her apartment. Inside was a letter, hand-signed by the Secretary of Defense. "Corporal Elena Ward, you are requested to return to active duty with immediate promotion to captain. You will serve as Director of Combat Field Medical Training for all Special Operations Forces." Her breath caught. It wasn't just a reinstatement. It was a role built for her. A correction of the failures of 2 systems, military and civilian, that had forgotten what courage looks like. Standing on her rooftop that night, Elena watched the colors of sunset bleed into the horizon. She held her old military ID card loosely, the scratched surface catching the fading light. For years, she had looked at that card and felt the weight of loss, the comrades she couldn't save, the missions that still haunted her. Now she understood. The pain wasn't a wound. It was a compass. Mason Hale called her that evening from his recovery ward, smiling through bandages. "You saved me again, Ward." She laughed softly. "I was just doing my job." And he answered, "No, you were doing the job only you could do." St. Maryland Hospital eventually sent her a formal apology, an honest one, not a legal shield. They offered her a leadership position. Elena declined. She wrote only one sentence in response: always put the patient before the ego. The hospital would remember those words far longer than her dismissal. Weeks later, Elena stepped out of a military vehicle onto the training grounds of her new base. Thousands of young recruits, along with senior officers, stood at rigid attention. General Harris addressed them, his voice heavy with meaning. Those who fired her prioritized fear. Captain Ward prioritized life. Today she is here to teach us the most critical lesson: courage requires no rank. Elena walked to the podium, her voice calm but carrying the weight of everything she had survived. If a life is on the line, she said softly, hesitation is deadly. Protocol is secondary to the precise action required in the moment. Your hands are your weapon, your mind is your command center. Be decisive, be honorable, be human. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was reverent, the same silent awe that had fallen over the battlefield when she worked in 9 seconds of perfect clarity. Captain Elena Ward, the woman the hospital discarded, became the architect of a new military ethos, proof that integrity, even in the quietest form, will always rise above arrogance, above systems, above fear. She had returned not because she wanted recognition, but because she was needed, because her courage mattered, because heroes don't wear rank for glory. They wear it to serve. If this story moved you, if you believe that courage still lives in everyday people who refuse to back down, then subscribe. It costs nothing, but it tells the algorithm that these stories matter. Help us keep the memories of heroes like Elena alive. And when you're done, don't forget to watch the next story waiting on your screen, because real courage never ends.